Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to Other Minds and Hands. This is episode 2, and I am joined today by other people, as I have promised that I'd be doing. So with me is my co-host, Maggie Parke, who's going to be joining me weekly. Hi, Maggie. Glad you could join us today.
Hey, Maggie.
And not,
I'm glad I'm here finally.
Yeah,
Thanks.
exactly. Prevented by an act of God last week, but with us here this week. And as our special guest here, our first guest on Other Minds and Hands, we have Knewbettadobetta from TikTok. Good to see you and be with you here today.
Hey, how you doing? It's an honor and a pleasure to be a guest. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the invite.
Yeah. So I met Knewbettadobetta at a thing that we were doing with the OneRing.net and their post Super Bowl trailer discussion. We were both on there, but we were in a big, huge panel of a whole bunch of people. And Knewbettadobetta was one of the people that I kept wanting to talk back and forth with, but there were so many people who were talking, we didn't really get a chance to connect. And I'm like, okay. Really,
I was like, that guy. I want to talk to that guy. I like
That's
his idea.
exactly what I was saying. And in fact, Knewbettadobetta, like everybody, like all of my followers and community were all like, "Who was that guy? Like, we've got to get him on to talk." So anyway, that was they've been looking forward to this.
Thank you.
So,
thank you so much.
Yeah. So I want to start off talking about some of the things that some of the decisions that they're going to have to make, right? And these are things which are not necessarily going to be the first things that are on the minds of a lot of Tolkien fans, right? A lot of Tolkien fans, they're thinking about Galadriel, and they're thinking about the Galadriel that they know from the Lord of the Rings book and from the Peter Jackson films, right? And so they're thinking about Galadriel and what are they doing with Galadriel? That's an interesting question and an important question. But there are a bunch of other things that, because of course the Second Age is really sketchy in Tolkien's history, right, as he worked this out. And there's a lot of things that he kind of said and changed his mind about and kind of developed over time, and that which they're going to have to make choices about, right? And they're going to have to decide. So let's start off with the comment you made a couple weeks back that I didn't get a chance to respond to, so that we can talk about that, because you were talking about Gil-galad particularly and the choices that they're going to have to make there. So why don't you sort of start off by talking a little bit about what's at stake here with Gil-galad? What are the Gil-galad's kind of place in Tolkien's imagination as it kind of grew and developed, and what the issue is there?
So if we're talking about the Second Age, Gil-galad is the High King of the Noldor Elves. So he rules the Kingdom of Lindon, which is basically the largest kingdom of the elves. He basically holds the power in Northern Eriador in the world, pretty much. He kind of rules all the elves, if you want to say, even though there's other kingdoms, he's the big king. Right. So then we have Aragon, and then we have Celebrimbor, who kind of is in charge of Aragon. He rules Aragon, if you want to say. But remember, he's a Noldor elf. So the thing with Gil-galad, which I think is really important, is in the First Age, in the Silmarillion, if anybody in here has read the Silmarillion, we know that in the actual book itself, Gil-galad is said to be the son of Fingon, who is the son of Fingolfin, and literally these are the bravest, strongest elves. Fingolfin fought Morgoth. Fingon drove off Glaurung. Fingon is called the Valiant. Very brave, very valuable, important elves in the First Age. And Fingon's son was said to be Gil-galad. So that lineage is very, very extremely important. So in the book, after Turgon dies, Gil-galad becomes the High King of the Noldor, even though he was sent to the Havens and he was off with Círdan. This literally, I think it goes perfectly with the storyline. Círdan survives into the Second Age. Gil-galad being with Círdan, everything shifts over perfectly. For whatever reason, I think Tolkien wanted to change some things with the lineage and kind of correct some things. He said, Christopher said that the naming was wrong or the lineage was wrong, and Tolkien actually meant for Gil-galad to be Ordreth's son. And Ordreth, who was at one point in the Silmarillion, was the brother of Finrod and the brother of Galadriel. He was the second eldest.
Right.
This even made more sense when he was the brother, but then he changed it to being the nephew of Finrod and the son of Angrod. So literally that changes a lot. Also, if you know from the Silmarillion, forgive me if I'm going on a tangent and sounding like I'm going down a rabbit hole.
It's what we do.
Yeah, it's
Ordref's
totally what we do.
Ordref is a terrible king. He's terrible in the sense that he's not bad. He's just weak. He gets Tolkien taken from him by Sauron. He also allows Nargothrond to be usurped by Turin Turambar, also by Celegorm McCorfin, and he's just very weak. He doesn't make very strong, powerful decisions. And then the ultimate downfall of Nargothrond is when he allows Turin to build a bridge over the River Narog, and then Glaurung comes in and destroys Nargothrond. Now, I'm saying all that to say this. Making Gil-galad Ordref's son is a horrible retcon, and I'm sorry to go against Tolkien, but Gil-galad is literally, they sing songs of Gil-galad. He is valiant. His spear is literally unmatched in the world in the Second Age, and he's the longest lasting reigning High King of the Noldor ever.
Yes.
He rules and expands his kingdom. He's losing against Sauron, but he doesn't completely lose, and at the end he fights Sauron in a very valiant effort and dies, but because of his efforts they're able to defeat Sauron. So making him Ordref's son doesn't make any sense because Ordref is terrible. Keeping him in line with Fingolfin and Fingon would give him the much needed it brings validation to his kingship. It just makes more sense in the overall arc, and it doesn't make sense also for him to be Ordref's son because Ordref sends him to the Havens. Okay, let's say it's retcon and Ordref sends him to the Haven. Why would he send his son to the Havens to survive, but he would leave his daughter Fingulis to die in Nargothrond? That literally makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. So just some retcons that kind of go wrong, I think. And this is my opinion. I don't mean to go against the great master Tolkien, but it just doesn't seem to make sense. And being that it's left in the books and it's a retcon after, I think that's something they can play with and they can say, let's just keep it this way. It's already that way. Everybody's read it that way. And if you're a kind of a Tolkien nut, you wouldn't know that he's Ordref's son and that he wanted to change that because it kind of doesn't really work out. Certain things Tolkien was kind of like on the fence with don't actually work out when he tried to change him in the end, and it's just something that wasn't really seen by him before he passed. And his son just kind of wanted to keep with his father's wishes, I guess, and write truly what he wrote in his notes. But some things were better left unchanged, and I think that's one of them. So I hope I didn't go crazy a bit there, but in the Second Age, Gil-galad is that guy. And ultimately, he's the High King. And I also got into a conversation whereas Celebrimbor is technically, if we want to be honest, the rightful heir to the throne because his line was the Feanor's line. Feanor is the eldest son. Feanor, and then Maethros became king. But then Maethros gave up the kingship after he was saved by Gil-galad's father in the Silmarillion Fingon, which the two were very close. They were best friends. So he gave it up to his uncle Fingolfin, and then that line became the king line. But I think it would be really interesting going forward, which I think this is an option for tension, if Celebrimbor and Gil-galad get along famously, but there's kind of a tension that Sauron plays on, being with Celebrimbor, like, hey man, you kind of should be the rightful king. Right. Why don't you let me teach you how to do these to be better? They don't even want to admit me in there because they don't want anybody to be better than them. You guys are great builders. You're the grandson of Feanor. It's just things that you can take from the writing and then you can accentuate, and then this is all there for you to play with. And I think it would be really, really good writing, and it would be true to the story. Think about that. It would be absolutely pertinent for them to do that. It would just make sense. Because that's something Sauron would do, Anatar would do. Very lightly, just sprinkle the idea that, hey, you're Feanor's grandson. Wasn't he the High King of the Noldor? Aren't you the rightful ruler? Why are you in Aragon and not ruling Lindon?
Yeah. Go ahead, Maggie.
So I thought that was a great thing that they could do, if they wanted to add drama, but drama that was actually there behind the scenes, not a created drama where they tend to do a lot of times, which that part of people's fears, I do understand. But at the same time, the Second Age is the age we know the least about. So you got to understand they're going to have to create a lot of stories and drama because they have to fill the gaps. We only have a few pages.
Oh man,
actually,
it is not much.
the second age.
Yeah,
Not much at all, and people don't realize that. So
exactly.
But that's what's quite
once again.
that's what's quite exciting, though. I mean, if they do tap into exactly what you just described, then they're showing us that they've done some research. So, like in terms of fan service, that would go down real well.
Yeah, there's a lot. Even Gil-galad. Sauron plays on Celebrimbor's lineage, and he's like, okay, against Gil-galad. We can also have Gil-galad being not sure, sort of like how in the Lord of the Rings movie, which you know about, Aragorn wasn't sure. He was kind of, I don't know, I don't want to fall in the same way that Isildur did. They can play the same way with Gil-galad, because if we remember, in the First Age, Gil-galad arrives too late to save Elrond and his brother Elrond. He arrives too late, and the third kinsling takes place in the havens of Sirion, and they get killed. All the elves get killed. Elrond and Elros are raised by Maglor. So literally they can have a little tensions there to where Elrond has to kind of forgive Gil-galad, maybe something like that. It's all there to play with because this did happen. We don't know how Gil-galad actually felt about it, but we do know he arrived too late. Elrond was taken. Elrond was raised, he was fostered by the bad guys. You know what I'm saying? And so I think there's so much there. People shouldn't try to add necessarily so much drama where you can take from the original story where the drama is there if you look for it. And then you can add, of course, you have to fill in the gaps where there aren't story there. But, play on those things that you do have. I think that's very important. So the Second Age kind of would benefit from drawing from the First Age, if you get my meaning.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would, let's go even sort of one level below that and think about those two genealogies, right? Think about because what I want to think about is like, let's just sort of imagine you're making one choice or the other, right?
Yeah.
So you're the Amazon team and you're like, okay, we're going to go Son of Fingon, right? And then let's think we're going to go Son of Orodreth. Right. And what are the consequences? Like what kind of, because I think one thing is I agree with you. I like purely objectively, I like the Son of Fingon better I always have. Right. But there are some other opportunities that the Son of Orodreth gives you. And of course, a lot of people, one of the things I've been doing for years is I have this broadcast called the Silmarillion Film Project, where we're planning a totally theoretical adaptation of the Silmarillion, a TV adaptation of the Silmarillion, and kind of discussing the choices we'd make and how we'd do that. And we actually chose the Orodreth one for Gil-galad.
Okay.
Not because like objectively I think it's better, but because it created some really interesting character potentials as we were developing these different characters and things. Anyway, so there were a bunch of things that we liked better about what we could do with that, with the story. Anyway, so
nice.
Let's think Son of Fingon first, right? If this character in the show is the Son of Fingon, who is therefore, like, one of the things that seems to me to go along with this is that in that genealogy, he is clearly the presumptive High King, right? Like, when Turgon dies, everybody knows, when Turgon dies, it's going to be Gil-galad, right? Clearly, it's going to be Gil-galad. And therefore, them sending him down to Círdan puts him in the position of like a medieval crown prince who gets, sent off as a ward to, somebody else, especially to keep him, like, let's keep him safe and make sure, like, he's the heir, right? So we need to make sure that, like, while Morgoth is stomping on everybody around Beleriand, we want to make sure that he's going to be the last one to be stomped on because he's the hope of the future, right? Yeah. And so a Gil-galad who was raised knowing, like, he's the hope of the future. Like, that's like his whole context of life is like, I am the future heir. I'm being protected down here. And there are lots of ways in which that can factor into the kind of person he is, the kind of leader he is, the kind of like his own personality, his own strengths and weaknesses, right? I mean, maybe it makes him arrogant, right? Maybe he's like, oh yeah, it's all about me, right? Maybe he is... Maybe he is like carrying guilt from the First Age because while everybody else was fighting and dying, he was being sheltered and protected, right? And wasn't a part of almost anything that happened, until, as you say, until we get to like the third kinslaying, and even there he doesn't, accomplish anything. Right? So I mean, he would be looking back on everything that he knew and saw everything that his parents and grandparents and everything went through, and be like, yeah, I pretty much sat that out, right? And you could take that in a couple interesting directions, right? Now it's his time, right? Now it's the Second Age. The elves that are left here are in his charge. It's time for him to finally be what he was meant to be. There's some interesting storylines that you could do, some interesting character development that you could do with a Gil-galad in that position, right?
Yeah.
Now let's take the Son of Orodreth version, right? The Son of Orodreth who becomes the High King. Well, yeah, and I totally agree with you about Orodreth, right? Not only is Orodreth himself very weak in all of the stories, right? He's a very weak king, exactly as you said. The choice to remove Orodreth from being like Finrod's wimpy little brother, which is kind of what he is in this published Silmarillion, right? To being the son of Angrod, who is himself a hothead. I mean, almost the only thing that we see from Angrod is his like rash, angry speeches. Yeah, exactly. Yelling at folks, right? Exactly. And yeah, so when he basically is kind of speaking when he should probably shut up is what we primarily see about Angrod, right? And so if Orodreth is his son and Gil-galad is his son, right? It means now we have a Gil-galad who was not the presumptive High King at all, right? I mean,
Gotcha.
it's kind of a surprise at the end of the day. I mean, right? So like we come to the end of the first age, a whole bunch of people die, a whole bunch of other people sail back into the West, right? And so here we are, the last of the Noldor in Middle Earth, right? Which is a relatively small number, right? And we're looking around and be like, okay, who's High King now? And we're, I guess, Orodreth's kid. Let's go with Orodreth's kid. He's going to be High King now, right?
He's the only one left besides.
Yeah, I mean,
besides Celebrimbor.
Yeah, why him instead of Celebrimbor? Again, when it's the son of Fingon, it's obvious, right? No one's asking why him. But if he's the son of Orodreth, why him? Is he suited for it? I mean, is he a natural leader that everyone's like, oh yeah, we don't care that he's Orodreth's kid and Orodreth was a wimp. Gil-galad is the man. Right, so we're going to follow Gil-galad. So maybe you make him a stronger character. Maybe he is one who does not have that kind of anointing from his heritage, but instead is just a really strong, powerful, wise leader whom everybody respects. And even Celebrimbor is like, yeah, absolutely, I'm not going to mess with that. He should be High King.
Okay.
That could be interesting too, right? Or again, there are other ways in which we could kind of take that.
Well, when you put it that way.
Also, yeah, I mean, I don't know, like there are possibilities.
Like that. I like that when you put it that way. It gives a lot of depth to the character. Yeah, so I definitely see where you're coming from. So this is great why we have these discussions, because I never looked at it like that before. But that gives a lot of growth and depth to the character. So yeah, absolutely.
You can kind of see. I don't know. Like I said, I think it could work either way. It just kind of and each of them gives different avenues and a different starting place. And I love thinking exactly as you were saying about the relationship. I think it's going to be. I always want to be careful because I sometimes will talk about like I'll sometimes say something like I'm going to be really interested in the elf politics of the Second Age, and I don't mean like political scheming like Game of Thrones stuff, but we're going to have to figure out what is the relationship, right? How do Gil-galad, Celebrimbor, and Galadriel operate? What's their relationship with each other?
Which retcon did they do for Galadriel and Celebrimbor? Very important. That was going to be something that I brought up because we can segue into that. That is possibly the second most important relationship in the Second Age. A lot of things happen with Galadriel. A lot of things happen with Celebrimbor. Clearly, their relationship is integral. Are they friends? Obviously they're family, but are they friends? Did he have a crush on her? What? Also the armor that we see, is that a Feanorian star? Is what are we doing? I was explaining to people. Sorry if I got off topic for a second.
No.
I was explaining to people that if it's a Feanorian star, it makes absolute perfect sense if you know the backstory between Galadriel. Either way, Galadriel and Celebrimbor, whether they're just best friends or whether he secretly loves her. Either way, him making that armor makes perfect sense. She spent time. When she first came over, she was in Linden. Then she went to Aragion. She spent time there. She went through Khazad-dûm, as we know, which is a callback to the movie and the book where she speaks the language of Khazad-dûm and says one of the lines of the poem that he actually Gimli was reciting in Khazad-dûm. And she went through there, and then she went to Lorien, which all was a callback to her wanting lands of her own from the first age, and back to Feanor, who she actually didn't like. So people were confused. They said she didn't like Feanor. She didn't give him the strands of hair. Why would she take a Feanorian star? It has nothing to do with Celebrimbor. Celebrimbor repudiated the deeds of not only his father and his uncles, but also his grandfather, which I think all of them are trying to remove themselves from his actions, except for his direct 7 sons. So she actually looked at him as, you know what, you're wise, you're making smarter, wiser decisions. Me and you are friends. And not only that, but he is the greatest smith of that age. Second only to Feanor. It is expressly said he is second only to Feanor. So anything he makes, you want. So if she's going to get armor in the show, she's going to take armor from not only her best friend, but she's going to take Celebrimbor's armor. And Celebrimbor is still wise enough and I'm saying nice enough to acknowledge Feanor is my grandfather. He's the greatest. I still am in that line, regardless of his actions or his son's actions. I carry that line. He put it over the doors of Moria, and I'm going to still have that. Now, some people say it might not be that star, but this is just in the case that it is that star, and they did a variation of it.
It kind of looks like that star, for sure.
Yeah, it kind of looks like it. It has the 8 points.
The
I think it is.
Star,
it makes sense, and it literally makes perfect sense, and it actually blows my mind that some people are like, why would she do that? It actually makes perfect sense. I just wish more people would read before they just jump out with I think the questions are kind of weird sometimes. If you don't know, it's completely okay to say, hey, I don't know. Why would she do that? I'm curious. I think they're saying it the other way, like, why would she do that? That's not right. Actually, it is. It makes perfect sense.
Or it's potentially right. Like it's an option. Yeah.
It literally is definitely an option for her to do that, and it would make perfect sense. Anybody who dwelt in Aragion, why wouldn't you want the smiths of Aragion's armor? They literally the greatest smiths since Feanor. That says a lot.
Right.
So
exactly. Yeah. No, I agree. And and just to make sure that it's clear, because a lot of people don't know this. What you were referring to about a potential love interest between Galadriel and Celebrimbor, Tolkien totally wrote that. Right now, it's not like it's a thing he was playing with, right? It's a thing he was playing with. You can read about that in Unfinished Tales. He even wrote dialogue, like he wrote a speech for Celebrimbor to give to Galadriel. Now it's after the fact. She's already chosen Celebrimbor. She's married at this point, right? And Celebrimbor's all like, hey, I think we could have been good together, but whatever, like, no offense, like, no hard feelings, like, you and Celeborn, I'm sure, are going to be great, because everybody knows Celeborn's awesome, but, sorry, that was a joke. I tease Celeborn all the time. Like,
he's funny.
Yeah, he's like the trophy husband. But anyway, and she is so cute how she tries to make him feel involved. But anyway, so this was an idea that Tolkien had, and again, to me, this is a classic example. You're right. It's one of the things that I too have been spending a lot of time trying to get people to just like stop reacting and start like thinking things through. Right? Start thinking things through, stop reacting. There are so many things that are in Tolkien, or like ideas that Tolkien himself considered and toyed with, and had in his mind, which a lot of people hear, and again, like, imagine if they do have a love interest, right? Yeah. If there is any kind of love triangle going on between Galadriel and Celeborn and Celebrimbor, there's going to be thousands and thousands of people who are going to say, like, that's an outrageous violation of Tolkien's thinking, and that's like look, there they are, just like forcing this love interest in where it has no business, and like, it's Tolkien thought that, right?
Tolkien wrote that.
Tolkien was considering that. Now that doesn't mean they have to do it. It
doesn't mean they have to do it.
And it doesn't mean it'll be good if they do it. It might be horrible, and it might end up being really cringy. But we have to, like, the knee-jerk reaction to just say, like, that is a horrible violation. Like, actually, it's out there. Like, it's out there. Tolkien put that out there. It's a possibility. Now, I'm not a huge fan of that myself. I don't think I'd make that choice.
Street.
But
so it being a one-way street with Celebrimbor loving Galadriel. Galadriel didn't love Celebrimbor back in that way. I'm fine with that. It's the same thing as with Maeglin and Idril Celebrimbor. So Maeglin loved Idril. They're first cousins. Now Celebrimbor and Galadriel are first cousins once removed, because her Celebrimbor and Curufin and Galadriel are first cousins. So literally, that's out of the question in Elven culture. Anything higher than the cousins of the second degree, as is stated in when Maeglin loves Idril, it's a no-go. So this is also a no-go. So I could see it, Celebrimbor, loving her, and it's happened before. But Galadriel being like, no, we're cousins.
I'm so not into that. Yeah.
And I'm not into that. Also, I'm married. But that doesn't take away from Celebrimbor's feelings. They may be best friends still. He may secretly just love her. He may secretly do things for her. And this is, a possibility. And it's written down. And if you want another example, go back, read The Fall of Gondolin, or read of Maeglin, the chapter of Maeglin in the Silmarillion. You will see he is in love with Idril Celebrimbor. So his first cousin, literally, their parents are sisters. So, brother and sister. So it's a thing. And it's toyed with, as far as with Galadriel and Celebrimbor, and it shouldn't be a shock to anyone. Either way they go is a possibility. I'd rather see them not go. I'd rather them be really close, and she be proud of him that he didn't go down the Feanorian, hate, kill everybody line. And they become close friends. He still makes some bad decisions, which I'd like to see going forward. I love to see that. But there's not a ton they can actually do. And that's another thing I think we should probably talk about. They can't do hardly anything. And all the stuff people are hating on, they can't do. A lot of stuff that people are like, who are these characters? I often wish everybody had a way to go live and to ask these questions live, because it's real easy to type a bunch of nonsense and you sound real smart when you're like, well, how can they do this? Why are they making that story? I would literally just ask them this question and let them not be able to answer it. What happened in the Second Age, and how many people are described in these stories? And they're not going to get past 10.
Right.
Yeah, they're not going to get past 10. They're not going to be able to describe anything but a few events. And then I'm going to be like, so where's the rest of the story?
Exactly. Especially the thing that, and again, it's my theme is don't react, think it through, right?
Exactly.
When they I've heard people saying, like, oh, look at these invented human characters that they're forcing in, right? Like Bronwyn the healer lady and Halbrand the whoever he is, right, on the raft with Galadriel. I'd say, okay, let's talk about human characters in Middle-earth in the Second Age. Start listing them for me. Okay, that's it. Yeah, none. We get Numenorians who come over, but we know nothing at all.
Nothing about them.
Tolkien gives a one-sentence synopsis of what was happening with the humans in Middle-earth at that time, and it goes like this: the lot of men was unhappy. There we go. There we go. The lot of men was unhappy in Middle-earth, right?
They were stuck in the Dark Ages very much. They were backward. The Numenorians came over. Some were good. Some usurped the men of Middle-earth. That is literally all you know.
That's what makes it perfect adaptation fodder. We can do whatever we want.
Exactly.
So I once said to someone who said that same thing. I was like, so it doesn't say anybody had wives. So because it doesn't say that,
right?
Did that not happen? So we shouldn't put anybody having a wife in there because it doesn't say that.
In the Silmarillion,
you know what I'm saying? Like, clearly they had to have children and everything. Clearly there's going to be people in the stories that aren't mentioned that we have to bring these races in. We know from, you got to use your brain. We know from future events and past events, kind of what happens. So even with the nine, we'll use the nine as an example, right?
Right.
We don't know who the nine are. Wrong. We know actually a little bit about the
A
nine.
little bit.
Actually,
Yeah.
we know a little bit. We know that three of them were Black Numenorians. Do we have to know their names? No. They were High Lords of Numenor that came over to places like Umbar, Lebanon, and they
Right.
had even Amroth, and they had settlements on the coast.
Right.
The Black Numenorians settled on the coast, and they were the ones to usurp the men of Middle Earth and do wicked things. That's why they were called Black Numenorians. So we have, boom, we know that. The Witch King should be one of these. Probably the most powerful one, probably the one that settled at Umbar, maybe. Possible, whatever they do, possible. It doesn't matter.
Right.
We kind of know that much. But if you didn't think about that, you're not thinking that. Then we know a couple of them went over to Harad. Boom. We know the Haradrim should be in the Second Age. We should see some kind of interaction.
Definitely.
Boom. The Easterlings, Kumar, the Black Easterling.
Right.
Boom.
The one Nazgul we know the name of.
Like, come on, like, it's not that difficult. So we actually do know. So these peoples, we can't just have him be the one guy and him not have a following, and they would have to play on. They would have to create other characters for him to trick, rule over something to interact to deal with. We know the Easterlings from now. We know the Haradrim from now. We know that they worship Sauron. We know that Melkor, way in the depths of time, discovered men first and left Angband with Sauron, and he went over and he corrupted them. This is why the Easterlings and the Haradrim and the Southrons and possibly men from Rune possibly were under Sauron's rule and his engagement, because he got to them first. He influenced them, not because they were inherently evil. It expressly says he got to them first. This is what happened. They worshipped him. His abode was surrounded by fire. These are all things we can put in. They do have the rights to the Lord of the Rings, so we can put these things in. Very simple. So the nine, we can bring them to the forefront, but the people that are actually behind the nine, the Haradrim, the Easterlings, the Black Numenorians, we can bring them into play. We have to create other characters for this. So it doesn't not make sense. It makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
It doesn't
make
not
up
make
characters.
perfect sense.
Agreed.
Create other characters and to bring them to the forefront, to see other elven kingdoms that we know, not Ordreth, Orifer is not like the Noldor elves.
Right.
Who comes over in the Second Age? The Noldor elves. It takes a great feat for Gil-galad and Elendil to convince Orifer, who didn't listen to him at the end. This is how he died.
Right.
He didn't want to listen to them, and he went forward in battle and died in the battle of Daggalad. So you know that there was some tension there. He didn't like them. This is something we can bring the Sylvan elves from that area, and now we have Sylvan elves that we don't necessarily know about. We know that there's elves near the White Mountains, where Amroth ends up going and going to Umbar and near Amroth, where he went to go sail away in the Third Age. We know that there are elf settlements there where they leave. There's elven settlements of Sylvan elves in Lorien. Now we see, we know from the story of Nimrodel that she didn't like that Galadriel and Celebrimbor. There's tensions there. There's ways to play. This is all comes from the Second Age when they came over and they interacted in the first place. So it's not as simple as just saying, "Oh, this didn't happen." No, it very much did happen. Now we have a base history where even just the simplest phrase can turn into a great drama, as long as you know how to incorporate the people and make them interact and bring them to the forefront. We can bring Sylvan elves into the equation, have them not necessarily get along with the Noldor elves at first. Galadriel win them over and ends up going, and there's still tension there, but she ends up going, boom. You know, it's a bunch of stuff you can do, but we need those integral side characters that you say don't exist. We need them. We can't just have the one character. We can't just have Galadriel talk to one Sylvan elf and then everything. That's not going to make any sense, because then you're going to be like, Where's the world? Where's the
Where's
world?
the world? Where's the world? That's a
other?
perfect question. Because of course that's the other thing we think about, right? If we go through our list of, 10 characters, like the list of characters that Tolkien did actually describe or mention in the Second Age, he mentioned them in the context of this like big picture genealogical like major events in history. In other words, they're almost all kings and queens and rulers of the lands.
The most
right?
flushed out is Numenor. That's the most flushed out part. Is the Gil-galad. That's the most flushed out part of the Second Age that we have.
Yeah. So if you want to talk about anybody, so the Sylvan Elves are a great example, right? Okay, we have Orifer, right? And we know by extension Thranduil, and Legolas is probably not around yet, but we don't even know for sure when Legolas was born. So, but anyway, okay, but like in case we might want to tell a story about somebody besides the king, we need to invent a character because the only one we have is this is like, goodness, of course, this is like giving me flashbacks to the many, 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 many conversations I had about Tauriel in the Hobbit films, right? When people were saying like, why would they invent a new character like that? And I'm like, because literally the only elf character who is like involved in the story is the king, who is only called Elven King in the book, right? So, I mean, I know we get the butler and the
literally the butler and the king.
The butler, right? Is that, and we don't know anything about him, right? Apart from the fact that he gets drunk. So anyway, it's there's so much that there's so much. I mean, so yes, they Peter Jackson. I always said like Peter Jackson needed to invent another character so that we could have somebody besides Thranduil and Legolas involved in the story in any way, right? And that makes the story more interesting. Now, again, I'm not. Just as my saying, I think the invention of the character of Tauriel makes perfect sense. And by the way, if you're gonna invent a character in The Hobbit because you need that in order to flesh out the story, why should it not be a woman when there are no female characters in The Hobbit? Like, again, like how is it even defensible to make up another male character under those circumstances? But whatever. Although I absolutely think it's not only defensible, it's utterly logical. It was almost necessary for them to make up a character like her. That doesn't mean I'm saying I think what they did with Tauriel's character was awesome. I don't.
I agreed with the creation of the character. It made sense, and then it got away from them, and they wanted to create too much drama, and which they often
the
do.
whole tacky love triangle thing.
That was weird. It went a weird direction. It makes no sense in the sense of any of the history between the elves and the dwarves at all. They would never fall in love just because literally they're juxtaposition races that are literally made to not. We're lucky we got the friendships that we got out of it. Love, get it out of it. It's not going to happen between those two. I understand people's qualms with that, but
exactly. But again, so I would just again say the same thing about this is another thing, like don't react, think it through, right? Just because all of these things that we're talking about are on the table, right? All of ways they can develop Gil-galad's character, ways they can develop Celebrimbor and Galadriel's relationship, ways in which they can develop, the human angles and what's going on. As you say, where's the world, right? What was it like for humans in Eregion, right? We know they were there. Like the Brelanders have been there, all through.
It says that,
right? It says that.
Were there.
So we know there are human cultures there, right? So, how were they? What was their relationship with the elves like? Right? Did they interact with them at all? What did they think about them? And what was their like? I mean, if meanwhile, while Eregion is going on, even before things, Sauron comes in and things go bad, if the lot of men in Middle-earth was unhappy, what was their perspective towards the elves? What was the elves' perspective? I mean, so I actually if I had to point to one story that I find most tantalizing in a positive way, like one that I'm really interested to see where they develop it, that was pointed at or hinted at in the trailer, it's the relationship between Galadriel and Halbrand, right? Because that seems to me a really interesting narrative opportunity. Right, there's an opportunity there for them to really explore, hey, okay, high elf encounters human. I still don't understand the circumstances. I don't know why they're on a raft, but whatever. High elf encounters human. And now like those two like worlds have to kind of deal with each other. And how are the elves, what is Galadriel going to do in that kind of an instance? What kind of, do they feel any responsibility? I mean, she's going to remember, many of them are going to remember their allies, the old humans, right? Who are, now the Númenóreans are their descendants. But, are they going to be interested in making new alliances? Do they care if the humans are suffering and starving or whatever? I'm like, what? How's that going to work out? There's so much that could be done there. And again, are they going to do it well? Are they going to do it poorly? I don't know. But I think it's a perfectly legitimate question and a really interesting question to explore. So why not?
I always say all you have to do is read. So when you read the Silmarillion, and they don't have the rights to the Silmarillion, but they don't need the rights to the Silmarillion. You know the idea that is put forth in the Silmarillion. So after the Battle of Unnumbered Tears, we have the Easterlings, who are basically all the other men of Middle-earth at that time, and then we have the Edain. So Edain obviously evolved into the Númenóreans, and they stayed faithful, and they fought with the elves. But the Númenóreans literally are the only humans that the elves trust. They do not forget what the Easterlings did in the Near Arnoidiad. They don't forget this. So that meeting of Halbarad and Galadriel could be something to where she's like, absolutely not. I don't trust y'all. Maybe she has to learn, but this is 100% legit, because all you have to do is read, and it's all in the text. It's all in the text. Those relationships are explained expressly. Only the descendants of the Edain are trusted by the elves. They do not deal with the rest of men. And even in the Lord of the Rings, the elves do not deal with the rest of the men like that. They do not deal with them at all. They deal with the Númenóreans and fight with the Númenóreans. They don't deal with the Dunlendings. You don't see any dealings with the elves and the Dunlendings or the Druidain or anybody else. They don't deal with the men from Bree, only the direct descendants from the Edain, because they know what they did for them, and basically at their own I think the Edain are great because they did not have to get involved.
Right, exactly.
They
Totally
did
agree.
not have to get involved. This is why Númenor was gifted to them. They could have just been like, you're on your own. This isn't our problem.
Exactly. But of course, it creates a really interesting, because again, like, you're absolutely right. It's every reason to think that, like, the mainline elf response would be, oh yeah, those humans, descendants of the Easterlings, we don't trust them. Descendants of who? The Easterlings from what, like 1,000 years ago? Right? And you're still blaming the people that, that were descended from them, 100 generations later. I mean, like, there's a lot of bigotry that could be happening, among the elves, to say, like, wait, seriously, you're just like a racist? You just hate humans? Or everyone who's not them? Too. Right?
The humans only, I think I apologize, the humans only know of the Ivari and some of the Sylvan elves. They don't know about the High Elves.
Yeah.
They never went west into Beleriand. Those humans that stayed in Eriador and those places are all in modern Middle Earth that we know, don't really know, especially the ones that aren't part of the Edain. They don't know about the High Elves. They don't know the differences. So if they had any encounters with the Ivari where they had a problem, then they're going to run into Galadriel and be like, I don't know
exactly.
Who is you?
You're one of them. You're one of them. Yeah,
exactly.
Exactly. So no, I mean, there's a lot of, as you say, in both directions, there's a lot of potential tension and conflict, and and so the idea of having, a storyline in which, where we get the development of a human character, like, looks like Halbrand is probably going to be a significant character, right? So we get him as the kind of, I don't know, like, sort of spokesperson, or the point of contact with that culture, and bringing somebody who is a point of contact with that culture into contact with somebody who is the point of contact with the high elf culture. That's a really interesting scenario, right? I think that's a fascinating thing to explore, especially since we're also going to be laying the foundation. I mean, that also lays the foundation for things, as somebody was just talking about in the comments, like the Rohirrim, right? Who are eventually going to be. I mean, they're going to be, part of that, descended from the people who are there in Middle Earth in the Second Age, to the Brelanders, right? We can see a bunch of different ways in which people are going to go. How is this going to pan out? What is the elves' attitude going to be? What's the human? I mean, Sauron is going to march into the march through that continent with an army, right?
Yeah.
What's going to happen? Are they going to join together? Are they not? You know, I mean, all of it is going to be, presumably, the whole series is going to be building up to the Last Alliance, right?
Yeah.
And so that theme of, can we bridge the gap between elves and humans? Ultimately, the answer on some level is going to be yes, right? As we're going to get the Last Alliance in the end, right? But that they're going to be exploring those frontiers, like where the boundaries are between humans and elves in the early series. Like, what could make more sense than that? You know, what could be more sensible than to be asking those questions? So, what, you know, how does that work?
We can see a bunch of sour relationships be built as well.
Absolutely.
Not only, you know, we have the Last Alliance where men and elves do join together, but then we have people like the Dunlendings who very much get the short end of the stick far too often, and we can see the seeds of that. Oh, the Númenóreans came over and chopped down our forest. Then, you come over and you build your kingdom of Gondor, and then you give away part of our kingdom to Rohirrim. Just give it away. Part of Carlinathon belonged to the Dunlendings, and this is the source of tension that a lot of people don't know about. So,
for sure,
there's so many things to play with there.
Lots of really
you can see the beginning, stuff. The planting of a bunch of seeds. Yeah.
Now we're almost out of time for our first segment here, but I wanted to touch on, I mean, obviously a thing that lots and lots of people are talking about that I want to get your perspective on is the race question, the multiracial casting for the show, and a lot of people thinking about that, a lot of people upset about that in various ways. You know, just interested to hear your perspective on that.
So if I could be as candid as possible, since I have a platform to speak, and it's not just a video where, you know, I have a minute or two to articulate myself, let me say this. I understand part of people's issue. So I'm not I just want it to be, because I'm a person of color, I just want people of color to be included, no matter the cost or people's beliefs or the writing or anything like that. I understand people being purists in the sense that, hey, this was written this way. I just like it to be how it was written, because, you know, I'm very much that way myself. Even the Lord of the Rings movie, which I think are the greatest movies ever, I have a lot of problems with things that aren't translated from the book. So I understand that. But what we have to do is take a moment, step aside, and we have to say, okay, as a culture going forward in society, something may have been one way in the past, but going forward in the future, for the betterment of our people, is it okay to have inclusiveness? You know what I'm saying? There's nothing wrong with inclusiveness. They're not taking characters. They're not taking Gandalf. They didn't make Galadriel black. They didn't take Celebrimbor or Sauron and make them black. They made new characters, and they said, well, it's possible that these characters had darker skin. There are darker skinned characters. Maybe some of the elves did. And they didn't overstep their bound, but they tried to be inclusive. And I think that's a fair balance. And I think you're not trying to be fair by you just trying to keep it one way when you don't even know Tolkien's mind or his heart. Everybody's saying, well, Tolkien this, Tolkien that. You do not know. That man died in 1973. Very few of us are were even alive at that time. And I'm not one of them. I was born in 80. So, you know, we just have to stop interjecting ourselves as Tolkien. We don't know what he would have done. Understand going forward in the future, things are you know, that are getting pushed, but nothing's political about. People make color political when that's my race isn't political. My race or inclusion is not political. You're making it political. You're saying it's woke. It's not woke. It's just right. You know, you wouldn't have a problem saying, well, we shouldn't kill anybody. Should I say, well, why not? That's political, you saying that. That doesn't make sense, right? You're like, well, it's just right and wrong. This is just right and wrong. Nobody should get up in arms about it. Nobody's trying to take over fantasy or take it from people of any ethnicity or race. Nobody's trying to take it. We're all trying to enjoy it and love it. I think, honestly, there's very few people on this earth could fully argue with me about Lord of the Rings and give me a good go. And I don't mean to be cocky, and I just know I love it so much and I know what I'm talking about. And I'm black. And it's completely written by a white man and this, that, and the third. But look who he made, somebody of color appreciate what he did and the culture that he brung, and he brought it from so many different cultures. It's not just English culture. A lot of people were saying that doesn't actually make sense.
No, it
English
does not.
culture and mythology from the time he was saying actually predated Rome, and those mythologies, many different races and people lived there. And then especially when Rome colonized it, and then it changed afterwards and it became different. But people should learn history before they speak and say crazy things like that. They should wait until the show is out to give your final judgment. I never said I'm going to love the show. I said I like the trailer. I'm seeing where they're going. I like what I see so far because I'm thinking of things in my mind in the past, from what I know. I'm not just, you know what, I don't like that. I know they don't have much to work with, so I'm empathetic to their situation and I'm understanding of that. I know that they're looking forward to the future and they're trying to be inclusive as possible with being respectful as possible. They didn't change any character that you know in their color or race or skin. Not any of that you know. They're all characters that don't exist. So there's nothing wrong with that, which is a good thing. And I know that literally, they have a few pages they're literally allowed to draw from. The Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, and a few pages in the appendages. That's it.
Yeah, that's
if you knew how little it was, you would literally shut your mouth and just be like, they literally are working miracles because it's crazy. You know what I'm saying? So I hope that came across correct, and I think everybody needs to just calm down, get along. You know, like I said, I understand, but only to a certain extent. I don't accept any racism or bigotry. That I will not, no matter how much you love Lord of the Rings. I think there's no place for that here. And I just think we need to give the show a chance and let it come out, and then we'll see how it goes. And I may be the first person to be like, I don't like it, I hate it. You don't know that. I don't know that. But I'm giving it a chance because it's something I love. Why wouldn't I give something I love a chance? You know, I gave The Hobbit a chance. I hate The Hobbit. I hate it. I mean, it makes my blood boil. But I gave it a chance. I appreciate the effort, what they tried to do. I think they messed up some things, but at least I gave it a chance before I judged it.
Right. And that, you know, that's the thing that to me, in the end, I just find it mind blowing. Right. A lot of the people that I've been interacting, I've been yelled at a lot, you know, on social media over the last couple of weeks. And a lot of the people that I've been interacting with that are yelling at me, will just like they are explicitly defending the idea that like, no, we don't need to wait and give it a chance. Like, we can't wait and see. We need to judge this now and take a stand now against. And I'm like, a stand against what? Like, you literally don't know what we're talking about yet. Yeah, I mean, and you know, people are quoting these, you know, like, here's the like guidelines that they like, how they have to include people of color and they have to include LGBT plus people and everything. And I'm like, okay. So what? That doesn't tell me anything about what they're going to do. Like, even, you know, even to say these guidelines exist doesn't tell you anything about this. I mean, it's sort of like saying, it would be like saying, because I know where the boundary lines are painted on a tennis court, right? And therefore the rules of the game that the tennis player has to play within, therefore I know exactly what this person's strategy is going to be in this tennis match. No, you don't. There are lots of ways you can play and still try to hit the ball within those lines, right? Yeah. And it's the same. The same is true here. Like, okay, like so they made the decision from the beginning, as you said, to be inclusive in their casting, right? Great. What's that going to look like? How are they going to do that? What kinds of stories are they going to tell, and how are they going to involve those stories, and how are those stories going to relate to Tolkien's world and Tolkien's stories? And we don't know any of those things yet. We can't know those things until we see them.
How they made sense. We don't know any of that, and people are just jumping out the window. The biggest thing that I've seen when this topic comes up is false equivalency. People who don't want people of color in the show have a habit of saying, well, how would you like it if we made Martin Luther King white? And I'm like, what? How would you like it if we made Black Panther white? And I said, do you know what false equivalency is? What you're doing is you're making something that is integral to the character,
right? And
then you're trying to change it and asking me, how would I like that? When nothing that's integral to any of the characters that you know in Lord of the Rings has to do with their color. except for a very few. Very
And
few
even
are
that,
so
and
well described that
Yeah.
so well
No, right,
described
yeah.
that you know
Yeah.
exactly the color of their skin, the color of their hair. But everybody else, it's up for grabs. So it's not integral to the story. It doesn't make the story move forward. It doesn't make it change. There's no Africa in Middle Earth. People have this thing where they're like, well, how are they dark skinned? How are they black? They're not, there's no Africans. There's no Africa in Middle Earth. It's fantasy. It's made up. Literally, if you look at, I posted a video, if you look at Thranduil from 1977, Rankin and Bass version of The Hobbit, he is literally gray or greenish, and nobody had a problem with it. It's a beloved version, and he's not human at all, and everybody was fine with that. But if you look at Elrond in that same version, he's white, and he has a beard, which he doesn't have, and nobody freaked out. You know what I'm saying? It shows that, are you really mad about accuracy as far as that goes, or are you mad because they're black characters or Afro-Latino or women or LBGTQ or QT? I'm sorry if I said it wrong, but you know,
I always get the letters wrong too.
I don't, and I no disrespect.
No,
but,
my apologies.
but, you know,
no, I agree. I mean, and I would go one step even further. Even the characters for whom there is some, and it's never much, evidence about what their skin color is, it's not for none of them is it integral. Again, comparing to, so here are two comparisons that I would make, like what you were just suggesting, right? Take Black Panther and Wonder Woman, right? If you make Black Panther white or Wonder Woman male, right? If you cast a guy as Wonder Woman, that's a different story, right? Now you can tell that different story if you want to, but you're telling a completely different story, right?
Story,
just as you would be if Black Panther was white. Now you're telling a different story, right? And I'm not saying it wouldn't. Who knows? Maybe it might be an interesting story, but it's a totally different story, right? There is no racial parallel in Tolkien. There is no character for. Now, hang on a second. Let me pause and correct my own self. Racial, yes, in Tolkien's world. Like if it's an elf or a dwarf or something like that, right?
Yeah,
but
and in that sense of the race.
In that sense of race, absolutely, it's important. But skin color, like it's even the people that we know and there are so few, so many fewer than people think, that we have positive evidence of what their skin color was. For none of them there's no parallel between Wonder Woman and Black Panther in this way. Like the whiteness of the characters is not, it's so not important to Tolkien. He spent almost no time on that at all. There are places where you can see some evidence that when he was picturing this person in his mind, he was probably picturing a white person. There are places where you can see evidence for that, but that's not at all the same thing as to say it is a founding stone of this character that they are white. You know, that whiteness itself as a concept mattered. I mean, goodness, whiteness itself as a concept hadn't even been invented before Tolkien died. You know, like no one was thinking this way or talking this way any time in Tolkien's lifetime, practically, right? So it's very tricky. But again, at the end of the day, I can't really respect anybody who says it's not okay to wait and see. Like it's not okay to actually judge the product. I insist on condemning it, you know, before I've seen it, before anything has happened like that. I can't. I just can't respect that perspective.
If it's good, they're going to miss out. If they want to be hateful, that's what we have the block button for. It's worked wonders for me. You know, people have been saying some egregious things, and cool. It's like not even get upset. I can't get upset because something's wrong with you. I know that I'm a good person. I try to my best to be. I'm not perfect by any means, but try my best to be a good person, loving, caring person, respectful person, understanding, open person. So if I see somebody not being that way, I don't have to look at myself and be like, what's wrong with them? Why me? No, I look at them and say, something's wrong with them. They made block specifically for this reason. Block them. I don't have to deal with them. They can't see my stuff. I don't have to see their hate. And hopefully they go get help and they move on with their life. Anybody I can change their mind or get them to open up. I love people like that because it's hard to change people when they're so set, but it shows growth. It shows, openness. It shows, just character to be able to go against something that you're so deep rooted in. And for you to be able to do that, that's awesome. And I'm willing to talk to those people and work with those people. But anybody else who's just stuck in their ways, you're going to be stuck in it. And you're going to see that you're on the wrong side of history. And that's the end of that.
We'll be talking a lot about fan reaction and engagement and things like that. And I feel like engagement is just like the biggest word we can use in all of this, of just, you don't have to engage with that. Dink.
Yeah. Yep.
Out.
Yeah.
So
absolutely. All right. Awesome. Well, we've had a lot of your time. Thanks a lot, Knewbett. I really appreciate
awesome.
Your perspectives. This has been a lot of fun. Maybe we have you back another time. Maybe when we get more stuff and there's more stuff to talk about, we'll get you back again.
Anytime, man. Anytime.
Awesome.
I have some stuff I want to talk about with you, so I definitely will correspond back and forth. And it was very nice being on the show. Thank you so much. I appreciate you guys thinking of me and inviting me, and I really had a great time. Such a wonderful conversation, and I look forward to more.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
All right, guys.
So much. Thanks.
All right.
See ya.
See you later. Take it easy.
All right, so Maggie and I are going to stick around for a little bit because we have some other things we wanted to talk about. Some
but
kind
I feel
of
like
general stuff.
I feel like I should just say that I had to just sit back and watch that magic because I know there were some comments about like poor Maggie can't get a word in. I had no words to get in there. These guys didn't talk this out. If you haven't seen me before, I'm not a Tolkienist. I do not have the Tolkien lore, so I can definitely participate in the conversation, but I will not have the correct names and the age and all that stuff. I do adaptation and film and fan reaction and engagement and audience and things like that. So we're going to bounce off each other for conversation. But yeah, I mean, I just want to sit back and be like, tell me more. that was fascinating just to hear the two of you that we have to have him back, because that was the tiniest of topics that we can talk for ages. That
absolutely.
And right attitude, coming at this with a deep breath and a careful thought before engaging in any of the really deep thinking. And yeah, all the stuff he was saying about like just people getting angry first, and you don't have to do that. I think some people think they have a place at the table if they get mad, thinking like, "Oh, I'm the best Tolkien fan because I'm angry."
Yes,
I'm sorry for you.
It's hard. It is hard, and I mean I was never quite exactly like that, I think, but I can remembering back to my own I was. I've said before, I'm a reformed purist. I used to be a purist, and I can easily imagine, like, there but for the grace of God go I. Like, I could have gone in that direction. I remember what it sort of feels like to say, the more outraged I am, the more that like shows my credentials as a fan. Like, the more you can tell that I, am serious and that I love this and that I should be taken seriously as a fan. It's a very natural trap. I think it is a trap to fall into as a fan. But it's a very natural trap. And especially so, there is so much focus on that, so much, that kind of thing gets rewarded, it gets rewarded, on social media, it gets rewarded on YouTube, that kind of outrage, right? People get attention for doing that. And so therefore it makes it easier to think like, we'll see those like really serious, legit fans, who are getting all these follows and likes over here, do this. And I mean, it's just, it kind of reinforces the whole thing, and it's really hard. But yeah, at the end of the day, as I say, it's hard, but I can't respect somebody who is not willing to like watch it before drawing conclusions about it.
Well, I remember back in the early
thing.
Yeah, I remember back in the early days of Harry Potter being like, oh, that's kids lit, I hate that stuff. Like, that's fine, but you have to read it before you hate it. Like, you have to know what you're hating on before you throw it under the bus. And
absolutely,
this is probably actually a really good segue into talking a little bit about the language of adaptation.
Yeah, let's do that. So this last segment that we wanted to do, to probably the last, we may talk about some other stuff too. And this is, and I was telling everybody, Maggie, how much I was missing you last week or last time, and how much I'm looking forward to having you here, because you have, so much more about the process of adaptation and the implications of adaptation. And so I'm very much an amateur when it comes to that, because I've become very interested in adaptation through talking about Tolkien and seeing Tolkien adaptations over the years and things. So I've thought more about it, a lot over the last 10 years or whatever. But this is something that vocabulary, you are so much more. I know I have so much to learn from you. So we're going to have some segments where we're just going to be discussing just kind of vocabulary, like making sure that people kind of
just ideas,
Yeah.
and I think a lot of it, like you were saying, is really organic. We both came at this from being fans first, and then the more you expose yourself to ideas and thoughts and research and things like that, then you do start to kind of change your perspective. So I definitely come at this from the perspective of an ACA fan, that I was a fan first and then learned to hang on to my torch and my pitchfork, and I'm ready to have a fight, but I'll keep it in my backpack and have an open mind first. And so I think one of the things that Corey and I were talking about with this whole process is to just be able to have an open conversation about adaptation first and foremost, and to bring that into this sphere, I think is just really important, because it's a process, and we want to meet people where they are, and I want them to meet me where I am, and everything's okay with that, and let's chat about why you hated that and what's important and what's not. And so there's a lot of films that are based off of my favorite books that I absolutely hate, but I watched them and it didn't ruin the book for me. So I still have that relationship with my love, but I'm very happy to put lighter fluid and fire on the film and never watch it again.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's and again, it's another thing that I don't know. Well, there doesn't seem to be anything I can say to people who are in this place, right? But the catastrophizing that is going on with people, they're like, Tolkien is the corporations are gonna destroy Tolkien like they've destroyed everything else, and I'm like, come on, people,
and just really basic stuff, like listening to you guys talk about the characters that are described, very few of them in the Second Age, you were saying Knewbettadobetta was saying how limiting that is, and I'm like, oh no, from a creative standpoint, that is fantastic. There's so little fact that they can do whatever they want with it. But you are making these statements like elven king. Well, they're king of somebody. They're king of a kingdom. So we have to be able to create that kingdom, which means I have to make some stuff up. And if I want that elven king to be mean, then I need to come up with some instances where he is
he needs to have people to be mean to.
Right. There's some real basics that this has to happen.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we just want to one of the things we were talking about doing was just some PSAs and some general chat about adaptation. So I figured I would just start with some real bare basic. Let's just talk about some of the pitfalls of talking about adaptations, and I want to potentially do two little examples of their Harry Potter. I'm sorry, I know I'm in the wrong fandom at the moment, but this is just one of the things that I find really easy to use. So
they provide excellent illustrations for sure.
There you go. But I'm the language, if you want to kick up a slide, the language of adaptation and the people at the table is just one of the main problems that you initially come into when you're talking about adaptation. So first of all, the people at the table, who's involved, how, why. There's so many more people involved. And that is often one of the main issues that I think people have as a fan of a book, because the fan of a book is a so solitary experience. I'm reading this book, I'm becoming friends with these people, I'm spending the time. I mean, it takes a long time to read these texts, and I'm learning their names, I'm learning their family, I'm spending this time with them alone, creating this world in my head. So then it is so alienating when you step into a cinema and what is shown to you is completely foreign to what you pictured in your head.
Yes.
It just, the only thing you can say is it's wrong. So not only is it different and different from what you expected, there's a real feeling of hurt. There's a real feeling of the words that we hear most in adaptation assessment: betrayal. We have words like fidelity.
Yes.
We have words like bastardization.
Right.
There are some heavily emotive words in adaptation theory. that there's a bunch of people that have tried to change the conversation, and one of the biggest guys is Robert Stam. So if this is a thing that you're into, just Google Robert Stam, and he wrote a bunch about some of the different language that we should use. And that's the tricky bit, when we're talking about these really personal texts, and then you go and see it and it's different than what you expected, there is this feeling of betrayal. So if somebody is a super fan and wants to be known as a super fan, and they watch the trailer and something is different than they expected it, they're going to go straight to anger and straight to defensive and straight to,
outrage.
mean. Yeah, and that's not why we're here. So I think one of the things to just flag up is this language of adaptation. It's tough. It's emotive. So we will try to not use those words, but we will talk about those words a lot. So we won't use them in assessing, but we will absolutely say, let's talk about fidelity. What does that mean? What is a close adaptation? What is a loose adaptation? What are the pros and cons of these things? What are some of the challenges that we could see in the Lord of the Rings Amazon production? And what are some of the opportunities? Some of these things that I think are pretty awesome. And then the people at the table is just kind of the other thing to keep in mind. Like an author, maybe they have a partner or a publisher, maybe some beta readers that will feed into what they're creating. That's about it. They definitely don't have any concept of budget. They can create anything they want. And the paper is not expensive. But yeah, when you start talking about a film adaptation and, you say something like the dragon flew over the mountain city, well, that's expensive. How are we going to do that?
Right.
So all of a sudden you have to make decisions. And one of the examples that I often go text in a god-awful film, but insanely popular, huge fan base, like 2007 adaptation. And it's a badly written book, but it's very entertaining, I think. And then the film was just pretty abysmal because they spent all their money on shots of the dragon and there was no story. So instead of building up character, instead of building up tension, they focused on this really fancy CG dragon. So you can see where some of the outrage would be. If you're spending your money on that dragon flying over the city instead of story, then yeah, that's a decision. So I think when you're dealing with somebody like Lord of the Rings fans, if you're going to choose CG tricks over content.
Yeah, Maggie, can I just ask? You froze for a second. We actually missed the title of the book.
Oh, sorry, Aragon.
Aragon. That's what I thought you were talking about.
Christopher Paolini's like a 2007 film adaptation.
Yeah.
So anyway, so that's just kind of the stuff to keep in mind, because like when we're talking about these adaptations to screen, like yeah, you've got a budget. That is step one. We have to consider how and what, and that money's being spent on this, and they're sparing no expense on costume and location, and the insurance would be insane. The music would be huge. Like there's so many factors at play.
Right.
But that's one thing. And then you think, well, the studio behind it, the creators behind it, the DP, the lighting guy, the sound guy, like everybody has their own interpretation. And yes, there's like an overarching view from the director and the art director and things like that. But everyone's gonna have their own interpretation. Exactly what you said last time, Corey. If like when you read a text, you get one thing. When you read it again, you get more. When you read it 10 years later, when you have some life experience, you get so much more. So if there's a single line that says the dragon flew over the mountain city, 10 people are going to picture that completely differently. Even with concept art, I'm going to interpret that differently.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, there's no clear answer to this. All this is to say, take a deep breath.
Yeah.
I understand where the feelings of betrayal come from, because it's a very personal thing going in to see an adaptation of a beloved text. I mean, you're going to hurt one of my family members, and I am here to defend them.
Right. It is. It's really important to acknowledge that. And there's a lot of things that I say to kind of tell people to calm down and tell people not to be so upset and everything. It's very important to acknowledge, and I absolutely do acknowledge the visceral reaction. Right. It's very emotional, and I don't blame anybody for having we all have these feelings, right? We all have these reactions, one way and another. And it's not, I'm not saying it's wrong to feel that way. I'm not also saying it's wrong to dislike something,
totally.
You can dislike it. And certainly I'm not saying that you can't, like decide, that, like, because I will say things like, for instance, I will say the movie is a different story. Like, it's not the book. The movie is one thing, the book is another thing. That doesn't mean that I'm saying that you can't compare. That it's, I think you can draw conclusions and say things like, okay, at the end of the day, this doesn't work for me. This doesn't fit for me. I think they've missed the picture of the books in some really fundamental ways, that for me make this adaptation a really unsuccessful adaptation. And the story that they've told, which is a different story, but it's a much worse story and a much less interesting story, and a much less powerful story than the book, or whatever. Like, that's absolutely, one can draw those conclusions, and that may often be true. All that I do very, very strongly advise is just to separate that, to distinguish between that and the emotional reaction, right? Don't mistake the emotional reaction for analysis, because it's almost never going to be. It's almost never going to be.
Don't rob yourself of that opportunity. I mean, it's absolutely possible that you could love both things, and they're incredibly different. Like, I think about Ready Player One. I think the film is completely different from the book, and I love them both, which is rare, right?
Right.
And this is quite controversial, but as an adaptation specialist, like, if it's not something I'm working on or I'm studying, I see the film first and then I read it, because I tend to really like both. Right. It's like getting my own private, like, special features DVD, menu. Like, I get more, and I really enjoy that.
Right. And I have to admit, like, I am one of those people who insists on reading the book first before I see the film. And I will postpone seeing a film for years because I haven't read the book yet. But that is shamelessly a bias towards books for me. Like, for me, I am coming in with the bias that I'm viewing the book as, like, the primary work of art, and the film as a separate story, but as a secondary it is to me of secondary interest to the book. Well, and so I always want to read the book first. But
yeah, and I think so much of this just comes down to your own process. So, like, I hope we keep coming back to this statement too, of, like, whatever you end up feeling at the end of the day is the right feeling if you went into this with the right attitude. If you decide to hate the Amazon series, you are welcome to do that, because you have come into it with an open mind, and you have tried, and you have thought about it, and you've analyzed, and you have discussed, and you don't like it. But if you come into it hating it and then you hate it, I don't have a lot of time for that.
Well, and there's nothing to say about it. I mean, it's and so it kind of makes me wish that people who are in that would just not talk as much, because you have not, like, by definition, you can have nothing interesting to say if you've just made up your mind before you see anything that it's going to be horrible. Guess what? Like, there is a 100% chance that that conclusion is going to be confirmed by whatever it is you do see, or it's just the way it is. And that's,
there's incredible
that
strength.
Out is not interesting.
Yeah, and there's incredible strength in social media, and I'm so glad that we have these communities that are able to have these conversations and things like that. But I'm not going to take your platform away, but I don't have to engage with it. Like, engagement is just like my buzzword with all of this now. Just I don't have to.
Hey, I like Nettlebrew has another really cool example, actually. This is his contender for liking both is Blade Runner and Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep.
Totally.
Really, really good example. Very different from each other. I also like the book and the movie. That's a really interesting suggestion. Yeah.
And that's probably a nice little segue to the other slides if we want to do at least one of them, of just, it's also because it's a different language. Like, we're spending pages and pages getting beautiful descriptions of something, and it's our interpretation of that thing. And then in a visual sense, we're shown that, but we also get camera angles and lighting and music and grading and movement and animals and cars and whatever else is there that maybe we hadn't originally pictured when just reading the text. So I think the other thing is to just realize this is a totally different medium that has a very different power in telling that story. So while I might miss some of the word for word text from my favorite book, it's somehow still there. It's just woven into this different way of sharing the story. So the example I've got here, this is from the sixth Harry Potter, and this is Lavender Brown. I almost called her Lavender Lovegood. That's nope.
Right, yeah,
this is
nope,
Lavender
yeah.
Brown.
Lavender
She
Brown,
and Ron are dating for a while, and they're a very traditional teenage couple of just absolutely smitten with each other and snogging in corridors and, you know, obsessed. And she calls him Wan Wan, and it's just all this cheesy teenage love. And this bit's kind of towards the end of their relationship, where it's just getting a little bit stale, and they break up soon afterwards. And she comes up to the train window. They're on the train to Hogwarts. She comes up to the train window, breathes on it, draws this heart, and writes R+L XX and goes, "I miss you." That scene is 6 seconds long, and it just makes you want to vomit all over your screen. It's just so like oppressive of her obsession, and just, I get it, teenage love, you know, it just makes you. It's probably about 25 pages of text, because it's not word for word. Obviously, I'm missing those scenes where she snogs in the hallway and gives him that ugly locket and all this other stuff. I miss those things because they were fun to read. But like, what I need from those 20 whatever pages is just moving on. Like, I need the relationship to end, and I need momentum to move forward to the next scene and the next story point. And I get that, but I get that in 6 seconds of screen time. Right? I mean, that is just mad. So yeah, just kind of keeping that in mind. And the next one, this one's a little bit different. Still images have an incredible power, and you can incorporate still images into cinema. So this is from the last Harry Potter. This is right after Ron has a big fight with them and is like, "You don't know what you're doing. I'm so pissed off at this. Blah, blah, blah. I'm out of here." Right. So he leaves, and Harry doesn't know what he's doing. He's very despondent and doesn't know where to go next. And Hermione's upset and crying in the tent because her, you know, love just left, and she's also frustrated. And we get this shot. First of all, let's look at what he's doing. So like, he's on super unforgiving terrain. Like, kid is definitely going to break an ankle. He's wearing really dark colors, very muted, very grim. The only light source is coming from that top right corner, which is his friend in the tent and a rising sun or a setting sun. We don't know if it's rising or setting, but the light is in that top right corner. And if you ever watch like road movies or any kind of travel movie, 90% of the travel motion goes from left to right. Like, that is just what happens. You move that direction in cinema to progress. So the fact that
is that kind of modeling the reading direction in English, basically, that we're used to thinking left to right?
I assume so. That's probably just a natural progression of just us thinking that is how we progress. And I feel like in this shot, you just get this like urge for him to go towards the light. Like, you're just pushing him that direction. And I mean, I don't really have time to process all this in my brain when I'm watching the film, but all of this kind of sinks in somehow. The other thing with this shot is that this is 8 seconds long. If you want to be really annoying to your friends when you watch a film, you can count out the seconds of a shot. Most shots in films are 3 to 6 seconds. So if you're watching it, it's like 1, 2, 3, cut, 1, 2, 3, cut, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, you know, and they bounce back and forth to people talking or moving through whatever. This is held for 8 seconds. So that to me means the filmmakers want us to sit with this. Usually that means it's an establishing shot. Like, it's showing us where we are. We're getting a wide pan of Hogwarts or something, so we know where we are, and it's setting us up for whatever's next. For this, I think it's emotion. It's like, sit with this. This is heavy. This is hard. This is frustrating. And then move towards your friend and go towards that light. And that is 8 seconds of screen time, and it's probably 70 pages of text.
I was going to say, can I tell you how much I prefer the 8 seconds to the what felt like 800 pages of text?
Exactly. Like, how long did they wander in those freaking woods?
Yes, the camping was intense in book 7.
Exactly, and which I also think was purposeful in the book. I think the point was for us to get frustrated. And it worked.
I agree. It was a costly narrative gambit, I think. But yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. It is frustrating and is meant to be. But yeah, and one of the things, Maggie, that I'm kind of taking from this here, just listening to you describe and talk about this, right? The way in which things are being said, right? When people think about they need to be faithful to the book, like it would be better if they took this straight from the book. What I often hear is there's a real oversimplification in what that means, right? Like when you're conveying something visually, you have a completely different vocabulary to use.
Yeah.
Like you can't, the color of his clothes, as you were saying, the way the lighting works in that scene. These are vocabulary elements. That might not be the right metaphor, but
No, that is right. Yeah.
These are
Tools.
techniques that you have, right? This is how you tell the story, right? This is how you convey a message, how you convey information to people. And it's certainly not just by the words that are said. It's not even just by the action and how, what happens and everything. Decisions like this, these are ways in which you can communicate things. But that set of techniques, that set of vocabulary is very different in a book. Like you'd tell. So even if you had, in theory, a film and a book who were actually attempting to say precisely the same thing, they wouldn't do it in precisely the same way. And the more you do try to just okay, we're given a description of the room and of the people and what they're wearing, so let's just make sure that on screen we do as much as we can to go back and forth, book to set, and say do it exactly, take that like it's the stage prompt, right? And do it exactly like that. Even if you did that, that doesn't mean that what is going to come up is going to be saying the same thing that the book was saying, because the whole set of vocabulary is quite different. It has a different effect in the book than it has in a film.
And you can't forget all the people that, I really glossed over that, but all the people behind it. I did this as an exercise in one of my classes once, where I gave the students one line from Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and I said, film this. So they filmed one line from the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and I got 8 different versions of that one line. Because everyone's going to have a different interpretation. How I view that, the camera will be in a different place. The beaver den will look different. The costumes will be different. Did you see the difference between the BBC adaptation and the Walden Entertainment one? First of all, that's budget, but also just totally different. So it's going to happen.
I did miss the old beaver suit. Yeah, but no, I agreed. And there's a sense in which, of course, again, when I talk about oversimplification, it isn't just the fact that the text and the film are speaking different languages, right? Are trying to say what they're trying to say in different languages. That's one thing. But the question of interpretation, as you were saying, right? That what Tolkien means, what the Lord of the Rings means, and what is the important thing that's going, that is going to vary very widely among people. And you're adding a whole order of magnitude greater complexity when you have two things now, because now it's not just a question of what we're getting is the interpretation of the director of that passage of text. Of course, one step that you've already said, we're getting multiple people's interpretations, right? Director, art director, costume designer, lighting, editing, music, right? All of these things, all of those people. And, even if they don't all share the same brain, right? So no matter how closely they're working together and how unified is the vision of the director, there are going to be some different things, right, that are going on there. But wait, there's more than that, right? Because then you have, just as we can all read the same sentence of text and have different pictures in our heads and different understandings of what's important about it and what it means, the same is true of so we might all look at this image here, right? And say, and have different senses of it, right? Different interpretations of what this image means, what this image is saying to us, right? So we have many different reactions to what this image is saying, and this image itself contains many different reactions of what is said from the book. So the idea that you can you must be faithful to Tolkien's vision it's
Tolkien
beyond
could never have
theoretical
imagined the tools that we have now either. Like
Right.
Tolkien didn't have half the technology, more than half the technology that we have now to be able to make these things happen. Like I just watched this thing, I'll see if I can find the link and send it to you, about how they made the teaser trailer title of the Lord of the Rings on Amazon. Have you seen this?
Yeah. I've
They
seen it.
actually made it with the wood, and they put molten metal into it, and all. Like,
Yeah.
There's so many factors that, like, he couldn't have imagined any of that, and that was the title card, you know?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
And also, just when you're thinking about like a literal adaptation, we'll get into this another time. But when you're thinking about a literal adaptation, like there's a really famous film from like 1927 or something that tried a literal adaptation, and it was 9.5 hours long. And then the studio cut it down to 4 hours, and then the studio cut it again down to 2 hours, not involving the director, and it made no sense. Shocking.
Right.
And like, you know, a lot of us would love to see a 9-hour version of one chapter of Lord of the Rings or something, but you know, we don't have the budget for that. I can't spend 150 pounds to go see a movie, and all these factors that weigh into it. And this is like standard adaptation. We're talking about Second Age of Middle Earth, which doesn't have a line for line descriptor. It has lots of space for interpretation.
Yeah.
So it's going to be real different.
It is. And then, of course, you add, when in the case of Tolkien, this extra element, right? Which is that you're not even just dealing with the book itself, right? That is the published book of The Lord of the Rings. You have to ask, and this is, of course, going back to what we were talking about, you know, with Knewbetta earlier on. If you're going to ask the question, is it being true to Tolkien's vision? Well, first you've got to answer the question, but which vision? Right?
Yeah,
which
what is
vision?
his
Because he
vision?
had a bunch of different visions for this. And it's true, one of them got published, right? But here's the thing I would say to folks who would say, okay, look, we have all this unpublished stuff that Tolkien wrote and thought, right? But we have the published, but the published books are canon. That is authoritative. And by the way, I want to do a discussion of the word canon and its various usages at some point later on, because there's a lot to talk about there. But anyway, the people who say, like, okay, there is the published Lord of the Rings and you can't talk about anything, you know, it's not even legitimate to say there are different versions out there, because there's the one published version and then the other things that he just thought and never even authorized the publication of, right? And the main thing I would say to people who say that is, are you giving the authority to the publisher to decide which of Tolkien's thoughts are legit and which ones are not legit? No, he never published the 1937 Quenta Silmarillion. He didn't finish it either, but he didn't finish it because it was not getting published. He was on the way towards finishing it when his publishers refused to publish it, right? He never published the 1937 Quenta Silmarillion, but that's not his fault. No, he never published The Lay of Lathian, but that's not his fault either. He tried several times, right? He never published his later Silmarillion thoughts, where, by the way, the world is round from day one of creation. And there is no, you know, making of the world round and, you know, all that stuff. Like, he never published that either. But that's also not his fault. He died before he could finish the massive, enormous project that he was doing to redo everything and make it all fit. And why was he doing that? Because he wanted it to fit with the Lord of the Rings, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're going to say the Lord of the Rings is it, well, then I guess you should be all about that, right? And again, so it's not simple. It's just not a simple situation. You can't.
And it's still a human publishing a book. Like, talk to published authors. I bet there are loads that wish that they had been able to put that chapter in or that character in and didn't have to cut XYZ. So we don't know what his actual vision is. The published book might not be it. You know, I mean, there is this
There's plenty of evidence to think of that. Yeah, I mean, goodness, the Hobbit. He wanted to rewrite the Hobbit and redo it completely. You know, does that mean that, like, we have to, now again, and obviously, again, I'm not at all criticizing anybody who loves the published works. I do too, right? Yeah. And even the Hobbit, I think the published Hobbit is way better than the revision of the Hobbit that he started, and at least what we have of it, from 1960. But again, if you're talking about, we need to root this in Tolkien's vision in Tolkien's world. It has to fit Tolkien's world. That is not a simple situation. And if you're acting and talking like it is, you're either fooling yourself or you're not being honest with yourself, or you just don't know, which is fine. Like, there's no harm. There's no, it's, you know, not knowing any of that background is not a sin, but let's learn about it. Let's talk about it. There's so much more to discuss. Another reason to think things through, and discuss them rather than just reacting, in the way that so many people have. Yeah.
I'm like, I can keep going, but I feel like we probably have to wrap up.
Yeah, we probably should wrap up fairly soon. There's a whole bunch of other things I want to come back to, but I keep telling myself this is why I made the leap to decide that we should do this weekly, because there's a lot to talk about, and more is going to come up, of course, as we go.
And I was also panicking, like, what am I going to say? I don't know. And then 2 seconds in, you're like, oh my God, we have so much to say.
We have so much to say. It's just, it's not even funny.
I do also feel like we should find some way to let people submit topics or questions or things that they bother. We'll go through the chat and stuff, won't we? And just pull out some ideas. But
we can. Yeah, that's a dynamic. It's a good idea. Also, as we're trying to feel our way through how we do the shows and stuff, it is hard because there's a whole bunch of things I want to do at this. I mean, I've been kind of keeping an eye on the chat as we go through. I'd love to be doing more like open Q&A with folks who are attending live. That's kind of a big part of my vision for this too. But I also want to be able to kind of discuss through some of these issues, you know, that like what we've just been talking about. Of course, I want to have guests and come in, and it's hard to do everything all at once. So we're gonna try to balance some things as we move forward and see what we can do.
Maybe we'll try to do like a one-off Q&A session, so that's all we do for a session. And we'll discuss. We'll let you know.
We'll figure it out. Well, at least, and you guys will help us figure it out as we go. So you know, there we are. But anyway, lots more to talk about, and we should be back. We should be back next week for episode number 3. And who knows what we'll talk about next week. So much more to talk about. I know there's one of the things that I would like to talk about. I'm not going to squeeze it in here at the end. I've been getting a lot of discussion and pushback about the things that I said about CritFic, which I would love to describe a little bit more. And because I think there's still, there's one or two things that I would, I think, take back from how I said it. Well, let me just say that right up front. Here's the thing that I would take back from what I said it. I think in retrospect, I shouldn't have been so strong in telling people not to do it. At the end of the day, if what you like doing, instead of discussing a film or a TV series and its relationship to a book, if what you really like doing instead is speculating about what were the motivations behind the people who made it, then I really should say, instead of trying to convince you not to do that, then I really should say, like Mr. Darcy, I would by no means suspend any pleasure of yours. Like, do it. If that's what you want to do, do it. The point is, so my own bias was sort of showing through there. I dislike that, and I think that just gets in the way of actual substantive discussion of the thing itself. So I should have, like, if what you want to do is discuss the thing, if you want to really do analysis of the film, the TV show, the book, CritFic is nothing but will always distract you, and therefore should be avoided, as I was suggesting, if that's your goal. But if that's not your goal, like, whatever, man, like, you do you. Like, so that's the one thing I regret from how I said that. I should have been a little bit clearer about the kind of framework I was operating under with that. There are some other things that I think are just a lot of the responses or kind of rebuttals I've gotten about it have been, I think, just kind of misunderstanding the point of it. And again, a lot of that my own fault. So we'll talk about that more probably next week.
You're human. This is what we do.
That's it. Yeah. And let's by all means continue the discussion. So all right. Thanks everybody for joining us. Look forward to further conversation. Thanks, Maggie. So glad you could be here, and we will look forward to more next week. So thanks everybody. See you guys soon.
See ya.